Hey, cool kids. Welcome back to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm Greg Payne. Before we get started on this week's episode, I want to remind you guys that I've got this podcast also over on YouTube, so you can watch me and watch the guests that I have with our interactions. And by subscribing to the YouTube podcast, it's a great way to help us get discovered over there. Some of you may or may not know that YouTube is actually the number 2 search engine on the internet today. So number 1 is Google, and then number 2 is, well, I mean, it's also Google, but it's YouTube. So people that are out there looking for information about grandparenting, families, grandfathers in particular, when you help to subscribe with that show on YouTube, you help all those algorithms and everything so that this great content shows up in their search for information that's related to families and related to their role as a grandparent. So please go over and do that. As always, please go over and check out the store. Love to see some more cool grandpa hats get made and sold and out the door, so we can celebrate ourselves as cool grandpas, but then also celebrate those cool grandpas in our lives with a little something out there. So what I want to do is today talk about a subject that's both deeply personal and incredibly important. And that is what happens when a boy grows up without an active father in his life. Maybe his dad walked away. Maybe he's physically absent. Maybe he's emotionally unavailable. Maybe addiction, incarceration, divorce, military service, or death has changed that family and that family dynamic forever. Whatever that reason is, we know that there are millions of boys growing up without daily guidance from their fathers. Now, before we go any further, I want to say something that's important. This episode is not about blaming fathers. Life is complicated, and some fathers desperately want to be involved but face legal or financial or family barriers that prevent them from being an active participant in their sons' lives. Others, let's be honest, simply weren't prepared to be fathers. They didn't have great role models, and everybody's family story is different. And we know that if oftentimes young men don't have role models, other masculine role models, they're fishing around, they're looking for whoever might fill that role. And a lot of times they get filled with people that are, let's just say, not the best influences out there. And sometimes that makes it hard to try to be something, and you're thinking in terms of the negative information, the negative examples that you had versus the positive that a lot of us do share. So it's very complicated. And I think some of this is about asking ourselves about what can grandfathers and really older men do to help solve this problem, or be part of the solution, let's say. Because sometimes a grandfather becomes one of the most important men in a young boy's life. And here's something else that's worth remembering. There are really two different kinds of grandfathers in this situation. One is the father of the absent son, the other is the father of the boy's mother. Those are two different relationships with very different challenges. And today I'm going to try to talk about both of those. And whether you live next door, across town, across the country, or halfway across the world, you can still help raise a boy into a good man. And let's talk about how. So there's an old saying that goes, boys become men by watching men. And that doesn't mean that women can't raise incredible sons. They absolutely can. And there's millions of examples of how that's worked. And lots of women do great jobs raising fine young men. But healthy masculinity is often learned through observation. Boys watch men solve problems, apologize, how we treat women, respond to frustration. How do we handle success? How do we deal with failure? How do we keep promises? And young men and boys are constantly asking themselves, even if it's not actively, is this what being a man looks like? If dad isn't around, and, I think someone else often becomes that example. And like I said, hopefully it's a great example, but a lot of times with social media and other things, it's a very negative example. And sometimes those examples, the really positive ones, come from a coach, a teacher, an uncle, a pastor, and very often it's also grandpa. And here's the encouraging news: you don't have to replace dad. In fact, that's not really your job and your responsibility. You simply have to become a trustworthy man in his life. That's a very different role, and perhaps even a healthier one for us. Let's begin with perhaps the hardest situation. You're the father of the absent dad. This is emotionally complicated. You might feel guilty. You might wonder about, where did I fail? Why did he do what he did? You may have anger towards your son for some of the decisions that he made. Maybe your own son disappeared. Maybe he hurt his child, your grandchild. Maybe he hurt the boy's mother. These emotions are very real. Here's the challenge, though: your grandson is not responsible for your son's decisions. So let's not make him carry any of that burden. If you're feeling angry and upset and you've got some things you need to work on so that you can be better in control of your emotions, make sure you're talking with somebody. Make sure you're working through that, because um, the mother and the grandson and any of the grandchildren, they don't need to be on the receiving side of any of that shame, any of the guilt, any of the negative emotions that you might be feeling. So definitely be working on that if you're in that situation, especially I think as circumstances happen and happen quickly. When the situation of the home life changes fast, it may take a while to process through some of these things. So I want to jump back into this and talk about the greatest gifts that you can give to your grandchildren, and your grandson especially, is refusing to speak badly about his father. Children almost always identify with both parents, and when you attack his father, he often hears the criticism of himself. So many times, if you think back on your own relationship and your own identity, how many of the traits, both positive and negative, of your father as a man do you have? If your father had trouble with honesty, do you sometimes struggle with honesty? If he struggled with a type of addiction, maybe you've had struggles with addiction. If he was quick to anger, maybe you're quick to anger. So a lot of times, even very young, I think that boys, when they hear a criticism of their father, they're also understanding that they have that same challenge. And so they're going to take that criticism of themselves as well. So in my mind, instead of attacking the father, attacking your son, or pointing out all the shortcomings that may be going on at the time, be honest with your grandson without being cruel. If your grandson asks, why isn't dad here and dad's alive, you can say something like, I don't know all the reasons, but I know this: you deserve people who love you, and I am one of those people. And notice what this does. It doesn't lie, it doesn't excuse, it doesn't poison. It simply reassures that maybe you don't have all the answers, but you're going to be a steady force and you're going to be a steady presence. And that if your own son ever reconnects, you've helped to support a healthy, I don't know, mindset, relationship, whatever it is, so that any reconciliation can be safe and it's not going to have as big of a hurdle to get over. So don't become the gatekeeper, don't become the referee. Your loyalty is to your grandson's well-being, and not winning family arguments, and not bringing your own feelings and your own disappointments, negative thoughts and negative emotions into it to be expressed in front of that grandson. Now, I want to pivot over And let's talk to the maternal grandfathers. Okay. So this is the dads of the moms. And this situation is very different. Your daughter may be carrying enormous responsibilities. If the son-in-law, the boyfriend, whoever has stepped out of the picture, regardless of how that happens, voluntarily, not voluntarily, however it is, once he's gone, that your daughter now has a huge responsibility, and she's probably working, she's parenting, she's managing the finances, she's trying to keep life together, and probably really struggling to try to keep some semblance of what was normal for their family unit intact at almost all cost, right? And in this case, she doesn't need another person coming in and criticizing her choices. And I'm not saying you would be mean to your daughter, but I think sometimes that part of us that wants to kick in and fix things and maybe even micromanage can really come across as being criticizing and not supportive. I think one of the great gifts that you can give to your own grandson is supporting his mom and making sure that he sees you supporting his mom, that you treat her with authority, and that you remember that you're the grandpa and she's the parent, and that distinction and that line matters. So before making any big decisions, don't undermine the rules. Don't become the fun parent. Don't become the one that the grandson can get away with, murder, and then mom is the disciplinarian. You've got to be walking hand in hand so that they know that the rules apply at mom's at home, apply at grandpa's as well. And this can become a little bit tricky because we do want to be the spoiler, right? We do want to be the fun, but sometimes that's not the role that we need to be in. So we have to be mindful of that and really be communicating with mom about what she needs us to do. Instead, I want us to think about, like I said, becoming the dependable adult, offering help, offering wisdom, offering encouragement, but always respecting her role. The one conversation really can make all the difference. And that is to ask her, how can I support you while helping him become the man you hope he'll be? And that's a powerful question because now you're working as a team. You're not competing or negating her influence or her input on how she would like her son to develop, even if maybe the dad comes back in the picture after a period of time for whatever the period is that she needs you to do something to step in to show him what a good man is. That's where your role is. So here's some things. If you live close by, consistency matters far more than grand gestures. Okay. Don't think about the new bike every time you see him. Not that you get a new bike every time, but you guys know what I mean. Think about the routines. Think about Saturday breakfast, fishing every month, homework together, working on old cars, building birdhouses, walking the dog, attending school events. One of the great things that I think grandfathers can do with grandsons when the dad's not around is to work with them to do the little fix up jobs around the house, right? And it could be simply changing an outlet. It could be some really basic carpentry. It could be some sanding and some painting. Whatever the ability is of that grandson, show them how they contribute that way. That it's not about that they get $5 if they help you go sand the porch. No, they sand the porch because they're a member of the family, and it's something that they have the ability to do to help the family. So make sure you do that, and make sure that you're helping out with school events and science projects where you can. Also, make sure that you're teaching and showing those subtle things that we all kind of take for granted: how to shake hands, how to look people in the eye, how to write thank you notes. That's huge. That'll give that grandson a huge leg up if he's proactive in writing thank you notes. Teaching him how to respect women. Make sure that he's seeing that, and that you're giving him that nudge, like, hey, you need to go hold this door open. You need to go do this. You need to help mom with the groceries. Make sure that you're giving him that nudge and that you're not necessarily always doing that. These aren't just chores. These aren't just things about how to make the world go round. They're opportunities. And some of the deepest conversations that boys are going to have is when they're doing something side by side with another man, not sitting face to face, working shoulder to shoulder, where you don't have to have that uncomfortable, I don't know, that emotional piece of it that I think guys will do more when we're throwing a ball back and forth, when we're working on cars, when we're doing different things and we're together, but we don't have to sit down face to face across a table or across a room. And because that becomes, I don't know why, for guys it becomes kind of emotionally difficult for us to do. But if we don't have to look at somebody, we can tell them what a rotten day we're having and how tough life is. I really want you to remember is that your presence teaches as much or as more as just giving verbal instruction. Now, your circumstances could be that you're hundreds of miles away, and don't think that you're powerless just because you have that distance between you. Technology has changed grandparenting. If you don't believe me, I want you to check out the long distance grandparent, and Dr. Carrie Byrne has been doing fantastic work that's all data driven about the influence of grandparents across distances. And so be sure to check that out. But, if you are at a distance, make sure that you schedule regular video calls, read the same book together, watch a sporting event while texting. If you can play online games together, great. Mail a handwritten letter back and forth every so often. Send birthday videos and record stories about your own life. Teach family history. Most of the time family history tends to come up around barbecues, around holidays, when the gang's all together and you're telling a funny story about Uncle so and so and Aunt Sally and all this stuff. That's when the family history comes out. But when you're at a distance, sometimes those conversations get missed. Make sure that you celebrate the achievements. Call after report cards go home or sent out. Call after difficult days that you know that your grandchild has. And even I would say call when you're having a difficult day to talk to your grandchild. Now, make it age appropriate and you don't have to share everything. But I think if a grandfather can open up to a grandchild, and let's say this might be more for a conversation around 10-ish and over, when they can understand, you can tell them like, man, I had a tough day. Car broke down. I was late for work. We discovered a leak in the roof of the house that I've got to pick up. I got to fix this weekend instead of going and having fun, whatever those things are. And it's not complaining to your grandchild. So I don't want you to do that. But I want you to be able to model, how do you handle disappointing news? How do you handle changes in plans? How do you express frustration and sometimes even anger that events outside of your control happen to you? And I think that we can use technology, whether it's a phone call or a video chat, that way, because then we build a deeper connection. And in my opinion is that when we can share that we've had a rough day with a grandchild, that builds a stronger bond, because they know that every day at grandpa's isn't chocolate chip pancakes with whipped cream, with root beer floats for lunch and pizza for dinner, and watching whatever the most popular kids movie is all day, every day. And sometimes I think kids can sometimes think that's how it goes at grandpa's, but we want to be sharing that. So when you are talking with them, be specific in your questions. Don't ask yes or no questions. It's just a simple tip. And what I want to move into next is that boys don't need perfection. What they need is consistency, and they need somebody who notices them, somebody who believes in them, and somebody who says, I'm proud of you. I'm here. You matter. One encouraging grandfather can interrupt generations of brokenness. I mean, we talk about wanting to break, I don't know, patterns of bad behavior within families, right? If your family has always had a trouble with a substance or has always had difficulty doing X, having somebody that joins the family or somebody that's within the family that works hard to break that behavior pattern is very tough, but it's very rewarding, and it sets your whole family off on a new trajectory. Your grandson doesn't need you to fix every problem in his life, so don't. He needs you to be consistent. He needs you to let him work through problems, but he needs you to keep showing up, to answer the phone, to remember the birthdays, to ask the questions, to listen, to love without conditions. And these ordinary acts become extraordinary over time because he's going to get busy. And just because he's not reaching out doesn't mean that you should not be reaching out. Even if you don't get a response back to your text, a text that just, is like, hey, I love you, I'm thinking about you today, do not expect a response. If you get one, awesome, that's cherry on top. But what's going to be there is that understanding in his mind that there's somebody out there that loves me, that wants to hold me to certain standards that are positive, that wants me to excel, to be the best, whatever the kid's name is, that he can be. And so it's really important that you just constantly show up, constantly be that mentor, constantly be that role model, and be the person that you want him to be. And what I mean by this is an opportunity that you have to clean up some of your own behaviors if you choose to. That could mean that maybe you tone down certain behaviors. That could mean that you start doing a little bit more when it comes to fitness and nutrition. That means that you're adding more positive things into your life and starting to eliminate some of the negatives so that you're modeling that behavior for that young man. And I think that's a great why for making any changes in your lives. Now, I know I've been talking a long time, and what I'd like to do is leave you with this thought. If you're listening today or you're watching over on YouTube and your grandson doesn't have an active father, don't ask the question, can I replace his dad? Instead, ask the question, how can I become another good man in his life? As well as asking and looking around, who are the good men in his life? The coach, the teacher, the person at church. If you go to church, it could be the person up the street, whoever that is. Find out who those men are that he looks up to, find out why he looks up to them, and then make sure that you kind of get connected and aligned with those guys, and let them know that they're important to him, because he may not say anything to them. But I think being an old scoutmaster and baseball coach and other things with youth, when I've got parents and when I have people come up and say, hey, you are actually super important to this kid, it just makes me feel good. It makes me want to do a little bit more effort. It makes me want to do more for him, to show him more things that are cool so that we can grow that young man. And so, whether you're the paternal grandfather or the maternal grandfather, whether you live 5 minutes away or 5 time zones away, you can become part of the story that helps shape a young man and that helps keep him on the right path. We see so many young men that don't have positive male role models in their lives take a bad turn. Be part of the solution, be part of the resources, be part of that support for that young man. And here's something beautiful. One day your grandson may not remember every conversation with you, every time you went down to Dairy Queen to get a cheeseburger and a root beer and talk about everything and nothing. And he may not remember every fishing trip and every birthday gift, but he'll remember how you made him feel. You made him feel safe and capable, respected, loved. And sometimes changing the future of a family doesn't require extraordinary moments. They simply require an ordinary man who decides to step up and be the best that they can be, and who keeps showing up for that young man. And as I wrap up here, I want to say thank you again. I know if you're listening to this, that you are out there fighting the good fight. You're out there doing the best you can. And that's the only thing that we ever expect and ever really call for is do the best you can. Don't be perfect. Don't worry about perfect. Perfect doesn't exist, and perfect can get boring. So have some bumps and bruises, have a little bit of scar tissue, have some spots on your record, because that's what makes you interesting. And I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. If this episode has encouraged you, please share it with another grandfather, a grandmother, a single mom, anyone raising a young man who could benefit from having another caring adult in his life. And together we can help raise the next generation of good men. So until next time, keep learning, keep leading, keep loving, and as always, stay cool.